that number. The sign-in link will be live for about 15 minutes. Also listen for the sign-out code to be placed in the sign-out link found at the chat box. However, just make sure that you're aware that it's only going to be there for 15 minutes at the beginning, and at the end it will be announced as well. Be sure to include your name and the license types for your CEUs when you fill out the conference evaluation. You must complete the conference evaluation for your CEU to be processed. You will receive your CEU certificates as soon as possible after the conference at the email that you used to register. We do hope that everyone, regardless of CEUs, will complete the conference evaluation. The conference evaluation link will be posted in the chat box, in the break time slides, and on our website. Throughout the conference, please only use the Q&A box to post for speakers related to their presentations. Use the chat box only for technical questions and to find CEU sign-in and sign-out links. I will follow the Q&A box, combine like questions, and share with the presenter after the presentation. Personal information can be seen by all, so please consider this when you're posting in the chat or Q&A boxes. So please be careful with that. So I'm going to give you right now the sign-in code for this session, okay? And the number will be 82. Sign-in code is 82, and it will be live for 15 minutes. And now I would like to introduce our speakers. We have two speakers today. We have Dr. Farha Abbasi, Assistant Professor from the Department of Psychiatry at Michigan State University and Director, Institute for Muslim Mental Health. And we also have Dr. Matt Stanford, CEO, Hope and Healing Center. And the topic today is Speaking to Faith and Mental Health. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us. We can't hear you. There we go. I think.
Is it? Can you? Okay.
No.
So thank you for having us here. So I can start with my presentation. So what faith means to me is very integral to who I am. And especially it defines who I am as a mental health provider. The more I get into mental health field and explore my faith traditions, I realize that the ability to be compassionate, to be non-judgmental, to be accommodating and accepting, it's just grows as my faith deepens. And what I realized also that all these mental health traditions are very integral to the religion of Islam. So if you trace the history of psychology, Avicenna was the first physician to identify mental illness. He's also the founder of modern medicine. So then the first asylum, the psychiatric hospital, was established in Iraq. So it goes back into the historical traditions. But if I go to the religion in itself, so preservation of your intellect is very integral to being a Muslim. So Islam very clearly defines being mentally competent or not incompetent. So in order for you to be a practicing Muslim, you have to be mentally competent. So you should think you are a Muslim. You should believe you are a Muslim. You should say and act. So it starts from the intellect. And throughout our holy book, the Quran, it is emphasized again and again that it is so important to preserve your mental wellness. And a lot of religious practices like not using alcohol or substance use. That's, and then meditation, regular prayer hours, the discipline, it's all towards augmenting your mental wellness. So it is sad to see the stigma that we currently encounter in our Muslim and faith-based communities. So it's interesting. You will find people on a spectrum. So you will see people who would believe that acknowledging their mental illness is like accepting a weakness in their faith. So it is inevitably they will turn to the faith leaders before they will access mental health care. So then there are people that, due to their level of awareness and education, believe in this jinn possession or devil possession, which is not really a part of the religious belief system, but more like a cultural adaptation from old European cultures. So it's interesting in Islam, we do acknowledge the existence of jinn or the supernatural spirits, but we naturally don't necessarily believe in possession. So again, you will find a spectrum. And that brings us to the role of faith leader. So in Islam, the role of imam is not necessarily prescribed. You will see a whole spectrum, a different level of education, different level of immigration, cultural integration. So it becomes a challenge because we don't have a certified standard and standardized role like a chaplain. But these imams given under the condition, they are also not only being the leaders of Islamic Center, but they are also becoming the political face of the public. They are also adapting to the role of the chaplains and also becoming the first responders to mental illnesses. So the research that we have done, it is very clear that people want to and tend to reach out to imams first, but not necessarily imams have the knowledge or the resources to deal with this kind of emergencies. In order to fix that concern and situation, that's what for last 15 years I've been focusing on, how to provide these resources to imams so that at least we all come to a point that they are able to identify and differentiate where is it spiritual weakness versus mental illness, which is a two different spectrums. That said and done, what we do see in religious communities, that when you are struggling with your mental illnesses, you can be questioning your faith belief system as well. So you might be suffering from depression or anxiety and still questioning God. In the same way, if you are having a crisis of your faith, you will feel depressed and anxious. So it is important that we understand the overlap, but also understand where is it important to refer to an imam and when to reach out to a mental health provider. And that's the collaborative model we are trying to promote. And we have been training imams in first aid mental health trainings. So we are also creating awareness in the imams about their own mental health and wellness, given the limited resources and the dire need in the community, which is growing by the day. We have been providing the first aid mental health certification for them, and also developing this Muslim mental health providers. These are the providers who might be practicing Muslim and have the cultural understanding and sensibility to deal with their Muslim patient population. So there are two different kind of Muslim mental health providers. One that are adapting Islamic psychology and using it as a therapeutic tool, and others who are still practicing the mainstream medicine, but adapting it culturally to the needs of the population. So right now we have a lot of research happening, a lot of organizations working on this. It all started with, I think, delineating our roles, understanding the interdependence, and the mutual respect. Once that was established, I think it's a natural alliance. I think you cannot talk resilience in a practicing religious community without having a conversation around faith and religiosity and spirituality. So I'll have Matt add to that, and if you have.
Oops. That's not a good thing, is it? There we go. Not sure why that did that. I think there's a lot of overlap actually between the various faith traditions and mental health, kind of the nexus between those. In fact, I actually have quite a bit of experience working with Muslim populations when I worked in Libya for many years, dealing with trauma after the revolution, and have heard many times of jinn and the discussions around that. And so I'd like to talk from the Christian perspective, answer some of those same kind of questions that Dr. Abbasi just talked about. So I'll start with, kind of what is the average religious leader in the Christian faith? We do a lot of work around that. What is their view? What is the average congregant's view? I think generally in the population, you find a significant amount of stigma, obviously related to mental illness. And that general stigma really translates into the church just as much as it does any other institution. But within the church, in the Christian church, you do find kind of a spiritual context put onto that as well. So you see a lot of people that will look at mental health issues as if they are somehow a weakness of faith or personal sin, things like that. So although it does vary dramatically, what we find in our research is that, like in any faith tradition, you're going to have kind of a continuum of people who hold to more of an orthodox, kind of a narrower view, say more of a literalist perspective on the holy scriptures or the holy book of that faith tradition. You find that same thing in faith, and then in Christian faith, and you're going to find people that take more of a liberal view or a more of a kind of a dynamic or fluid view. And in the faith tradition, we find that indeed those that take a more conservative perspective of the Christian faith tend to take more of a spiritual perspective on mental health, and those who take more of a liberal perspective take less of a spiritual kind of approach to mental health. In our research, we find that about 30 to 40% of mentally ill individuals who interacted with Christian churches identified their interaction as negative. They said they felt that it was negative, and typically what that meant is that their mental illness or their mental health problem was dismissed as being more of a spiritual problem. And the three most common things that they were told is that their mental health problem was the result of a weak faith, a personal sin, or the demonic, which would be, as Dr. Abbasi had said, jinn or kind of evil spirits. And that's still very common, actually, within the Christian church today. You still see that quite a bit. Now, what you do find in the majority of Christian churches is that the leadership and the congregants, they want to help individuals with mental health problems. It's just they simply don't know what to do. They aren't equipped to deal with that. In fact, when you survey clergy, and we've done that many times, as have others, you find that 70% of Christian clergy say that they don't feel adequately trained to even recognize mental health care problems. Although, as we looked at that more, really what they mean is they don't feel that they can diagnose an individual. And I think that's a very high threshold to expect from a clergy member. I think a person can be trained to recognize that a person has a mental health care problem. And unfortunately, because clergy feel inadequate, or because they tend to look at these issues that are in front of them as if they're spiritual in nature, less than 10% of Christian clergy ever make a referral to a mental health care provider. So this opportunity of the Christian clergy recognizing the problem and then moving the person on to some professional care is really lost. But so we really have, not dissimilar to what we see in the general population. We see kind of a naivete in the Christian community and in relationship to mental health issues, but a real opportunity, I think. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. I think faith can be tremendously beneficial within a therapeutic process, within a therapeutic session. I think that's pretty clear today. I remember when I went to graduate school, you didn't really discuss religion. And in fact, I was taught in more than one class that if a client came in and then they started talking about their religion, that was probably a sign of a deeper pathology. And so, I even remember there being some examples in the books that we had of, in essence, what would be a person of faith, just talking about their faith, and that was considered a deeper pathology. So you don't really see that anymore. I think the mental health community is much more accepting of people of faith, and really sees faith as something that's therapeutically beneficial. For me personally, what I see is I see faith very beneficial from a therapeutic perspective because it's a great hope builder. I think that that's one of the greatest issues that a mental health care provider will have. I mean, if your client has no hope, they're not going to get any better. If they don't believe that they could ever change, they're just not going to get any better. And I think we're better to kind of ground your hope than in your faith, because for instance, in the Christian faith, there's this hope of Jesus Christ is your hope. Hope is more than just a feeling, it's a person. Christ has sacrificed himself for you, that he's coming again for you. I mean, there's this tremendous opportunity for transformation and change, and that's really kind of the seed of what the gospel is all about, is that a person can be changed from what they are to what God would want them to be. And so I think hope is an incredible opportunity for in the context of the therapeutic process. I think another thing is that faith traditions, the Muslim faith tradition, Jewish faith tradition, Christian faith tradition, many faith traditions recognize that people are more than just a physical body. They think of them in a broader way. We talk about ourselves being spiritual, or we talk about ourselves having a soul or a mind. Those are very easy conversations to have in the context of faith. They're a little more difficult when you get into the scientific world, where people like to be able to measure everything. And my PhD is in neuroscience, and we talk about consciousness, but we even talk about that in a very kind of mechanistic, kind of brain-oriented way. So the reality is that helping a person understand that they're more than just the physical symptoms that they're manifesting, and that there are some parts of them that are okay, that can be developed even if they're struggling with symptoms. I think that holistic view, recognizing ourselves as more than just physical, is a very beneficial aspect of faith in the context of a therapeutic process. I think finally, what I would say in the context of that is that religion or religiosity can be a tremendous coping mechanism when people are struggling with these things. I mean, I'll talk about it more in a negative sense in a moment, but it can be very positive. If a person sees that we live in a broken and fallen world, that they're just struggling with the same types of things that other people struggle with, that God is present with them in that struggle, and that He is there to empower them, to walk through with them, to be present and comforting them. I think those can be tremendous coping aspects of religion. And I think that, that's very beneficial to the therapeutic process. If a person knows they have hope, or, based on their faith, the person recognizes that they're more than just their body, they're more than just their disorder. If a person recognizes that God is present with them and engaging and walking along with them, I mean, that's a wonderful foundation to begin to build recovery on as we apply some type of therapy or treatment. So I think faith can be tremendously beneficial in the context of a therapeutic process. Now, the real question, and I think Dr. Abbasi really touched on this, is how, what can a faith community leader do? I mean, I think the first thing that's most important for people to recognize is that in the United States, people in psychological distress are more likely to go to a clergy before they go to a mental health care provider or physician. And that's something the NIH has known. I mean, there's 7 decades worth of work on that. It's just been going on forever. And it's the same level of distress, the same level of illness that you see in people that go to psychiatrists. So it's not some minimized, kind of person just has kind of a little counseling issue or marital issue. I mean, people with serious psychiatric problems are going to clergy first before they go to a provider. And so it's an incredible opportunity for the faith communities to be a kind of a front door to the mental health care system. But as I mentioned, the vast majority of Christian pastors say that they feel inadequate to recognize, and very, very few ever make a referral. So knowing that they go there first, what can a faith community do? I mean, I think the first and simplest thing that the faith community can do is get their staff and their clergy trained. Farash, you mentioned the mental health first aid. It's a great training. We offer a training through the Hope and Healing Center where individuals can be trained how to recognize mental health care problems, how to make referrals, how to de-escalate situations, things like that. So, I mean, there are trainings out there available. Get trained, because whether you recognize it or not, and whether you want it to happen or not, people are going to come to the church, to these faith communities first. That's just how it is. Right now, they're not getting recognized. And I think, what you have to understand is the majority of people in the United States with mental health problems never receive any treatment, which is a frightening statistic. And the average average wait period between the time that or I should say, the average period of time that goes by between a person first demonstrating symptoms and them actually receiving treatment in the United States is 11 years. It's just a ridiculous amount of time. So if we could recognize them earlier when they go to these faith communities and get them to care, we could make a tremendous change in our society. So I think training our clergy to recognize mental health care problems, helping them build relationships with mental health care providers in the community. There are mental health care providers that are people of faith, and you're looking at 2 of them right here. And they're happy to build relationships with clergy and with people in faith communities to help them help their congregants. I think another thing is that faith communities can offer supportive, some type of therapeutic support, be that a support groups or some type of mental health coaching or that type of these are not difficult things to do, and support groups are regularly led by peers. There's lots of faith-based material out there. There's lots of other material out there. There's lots of great stuff, and it's a great opportunity for a faith community to provide some therapeutic support for individuals. We're better to receive that than in a faith community, and you can just build that right into the spiritual life of the faith community itself. I think another thing is that pastoral care. I mean, I think that, as I said earlier, this holistic perspective that faith communities have, that people of faith have, is that we are more than a physical body. So, why would we just send someone away that had come to a faith community for care and just say, well, go over here and get some treatment, and when you get better, come back and we'll talk to you about, God. And so I think, understanding the role that, pastoral care can play in kind of recovery from mental health problems. I mean, people have these kind of very, deep and important questions. Where is God in this? Why do I have bipolar disorder? And as I said before, religiosity, faith can be a tremendous coping strategy, but it also can be very negative. I mean, a person can come in, and I've had any number of people come to me and say, well, I believe that I have depression because God is punishing me. That's what, depression is a sin, and I'm sinning and I can't get my thoughts to not be negative, or I'm anxious. And that the Bible says, be anxious for nothing, and so helping them understand the kind of the positive aspects of faith, that God is present and comforting and empowering and wants the best for them, that he's good, as opposed to he's punishing you and punitive and you did something wrong and that's why you're like this. Helping them understand the positive side of the faith as a empowering therapeutic tool, as opposed to the negative. I think that's a tremendous opportunity for faith leaders as they work with individuals. So, getting trained to recognize these problems, building relationships with mental health care providers, offering some kind of therapeutic support like support groups or mental health coaching, and then, making pastoral care a real part of their recovery process. Spirituality, religiosity, those are tremendously important part of a person's recovery. Particularly their person of faith, obviously. So again, it's a team effort between mental health care providers and pastors and whoever else is on that recovery team. And then finally, we express how does that affect our own personal, kind of my personal practice of mental health. I mean, for me, where I am in life today, mental health is ministry to me. I am, literally was an academic most of my career, doing research, and I felt that God led me out of academia to take over this organization and to really basically do full-time ministry, training other faith communities to be involved in mental health ministry, trying to help people get to care. I mean, that's really the mission that drives my life, is how can we best get people that normally will not get treatment, and how can we help stop their suffering? And I think that's, the great call of Christ to his followers, is to help the least of these. I mean, we have any number of problems now in our pandemic where people are desperate for food and shelter and care and healthcare, and they're isolated. And so, I think that is the great call of the faith tradition, is that we step forward and we say, what can I do to help? So, I mean, that's, for me, it's a tremendously personal, spiritual journey to help people that have mental health problems. Some of I've said many times before, some of the most deeply religious individuals that are desperately seeking after God that I've met are some of the most mentally ill people I've ever worked with. They desperately want to know God, and they desperately don't want to be mentally ill anymore. And so this idea that mental health problems are somehow the result of a weakness of faith, I've seen just the opposite. I've seen people that have deep faith that are desperately trying to get beyond that. And so, I think faith and mental health go together very, very well. I think we have to kind of set up a straw man and convince ourselves that there's no connection. I will echo a few things that were said earlier, and then I think that if mental health care providers are going to work with faith communities, we have to do that in the language of faith. We can't just walk in and start spouting off a bunch of psychobabble and expect them to just kind of line up and do whatever we tell them. There's an important part of faith, or important part of mental health recovery, that involves faith. And so I think there has to be a mutual respect between the two, that they recognize that there's some mental health related treatments, interventions, and therapies that are unique to that sphere. But there's also spiritual interventions and pastoral care and fellowship and community that are unique to the faith community, and that those can come together. It's not that one's more important than the other. So I often will tell faith communities, when we come in and we train you to be more involved in mental health care, we're not telling you, well, just recognize the guy have a problem and send him off and then you're done. No, now you have a relationship, now you have a connection, now you can be part of that recovery plan. They came to you for help, so you should help them. So we offer a whole set of trainings as well. As mentioned earlier, mental health first aid is a great one, but we offer ones through our website, mentalhealthgateway.org. It's just mentalhealthgateway.org. You can go there. There's all types of trainings. Everything's online now. Support group training, all types of things. And so, I think the faith traditions, I think they all struggle, unfortunately, with the kind of integration of mental health and faith. But I don't know that we should necessarily be surprised by that. I mean, I know when I look in the Bible, I see that ancient Hebrews and the first century Christians, they struggled with understanding the relationship between mental health and faith and how that all went together. And I don't think it's surprising that we would struggle with that as well. But I do think we have to, number one, we have to be compassionate And I think that, grace should drive us, not try to I know what's wrong with you. I think it's just, let's be compassionate. You're suffering. How can I minimize your suffering? How can I love you the way that God has called me to love others? And so I will leave it at that, and then we can probably start taking some questions.
I would like to add something
Please.
to what Matt said. So the way I approached it in the Muslim community and with the faith leaders, so most important was creating awareness. What is mental illnesses? What is spiritual struggles?
Mm-hmm.
Then creating the acceptance. The fact that if you are a religious community, that does not automatically give you immunity to mental illnesses or substance abuse or suicide. So knowing that everything that's happening out in the society can have an impact on the community, and anything that happens in the community spills over and impacts the rest of the society. So I think that was such an important part to establish. And then comes the access. How can we improve access? How can we create these collaborative models? How can we provide trainings? And the training is not only focused on the faith leader or the faith community. I think we need to train our colleagues, like other mental health providers, to be respectful, cognizant of the importance of role of religion and spirituality in one's wellness. I'll give you an example that I had to deal with. So I had this kid. This is our month of Ramadan, and he was fasting, and he started having these experiences, which he deemed as having this spiritual awakening. So he felt he is in heaven or in hell, and he got so anxious. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and he was taken to the local faith leaders for prayers. But this faith leader has been trained in first aid mental health and has been attending my conferences. So he prayed with the kid, but he also emphasized to the family the importance of taking him to a psychiatrist and rule out the first episode of psychosis. So once he was referred out to me, it didn't mean that I would just tell the kid that you shouldn't be going to the faith leader anymore or not to pray. What I did was I evaluated him medically, gave him medication, but advised him to continue praying with the faith leader. So this is the hope, the vision of a collaborative care. And like Matt said, we have the advantage. Hope is not just an emotion or a feeling. It is a very important strategy that we can use in therapy.
Thank you so much for the wonderful information y'all both have been able to share. We do have a couple of questions. And I'm hearing both of you. And I work a lot with the community, with the faith community as well. So, and my husband's a pastor, 32 years. We need to get to know different cultures, different denominations, and build those relationships, because when we don't know, we tend to just stay away from certain people. So what y'all are sharing is wonderful stuff. All right, let me go into some of the questions. Question, the one that had the most votes right now is a question from Mark. It says, what were the two types of Islamic mental health providers y'all mentioned? Who mentioned that?
I did. Okay. So there might be mental health providers who are using traditional tools like Islamic psychology. using Islamic prayers, Islamic theology to do therapy. And this is, I would refer you to Khalil Center, that like the Matt has the organization where he's combining the faith training with mental health training. That's what Khalil Center is doing. Then our providers like me that are practicing Muslims, but we are not necessarily using the Islamic theology, but we are using CBT and medication, but adapting it in a more culturally acceptable. So not making sure that we bring in faith as an important tool, but at the same time, provide the biopsychosocial model of the disease.
Okay. Thank you for answering. All right. Keep the questions coming in. Let me see. I have, let me go to, okay, we have 2 votes on this one. This is Carolyn. Several years ago, I had to pass on a job opportunity in Saudi Arabia because one of my U.S. prescribed mental health meds is not allowed in that country. Is conservative Islam still very cautious about psych meds?
I don't see the reason why, until unless it's pork based. So in Islam, pork is prohibited. So that's the only reason I can think of that it had pork based medication. Otherwise, I've been doing a lot of global mental health work, and I'm surprised all the medications that are being prescribed here is very easily available all over the Muslim world. So they are using same medications. So I don't know what particularly, which medication was it?
When I was in Libya, the only issue was it was mostly a cost prohibitive type of thing. Right. So if you're going through the, that country had more of a kind of a socialized medicine type thing. And so they had a tendency to go with a much less expensive medication. So you tended to not find the newest medications available. It was more older medications that were available. So that, the medication that came out 1 year ago or 2 years ago, they weren't using those. They were using things that had come out maybe 10 years ago. And that may have been the issue. But I did actually come across the pork thing myself. There are some medications where there are pork-based products that have been used in the production of the medication, maybe as a binder or something, and they would not be allowed in the country. But so it could have been something as simple as that, actually.
Wow, that's very interesting. Thank you for answering that. All right, let me see. Anybody else have? Now we have. Oh, here we go. We have 2 votes. Corrine, I think it's Corrine. How do you deal with those who have religious delusions as part of their episodes? How to find the balance with faith and distortions of faith?
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, I once had a student come in that had been working in a residential facility that we were doing some stuff in, and she said, "You need to explain to me," and it was a faith-based facility, "you need to explain to me the difference between someone telling me they're hearing from God and that's a delusion, and someone tells me they're hearing from God and they're having a religious experience." So, I mean, that's a great question. It's a great question. I think, what I tend to find is this: people that are having religious delusions, which are not uncommon. I mean, that is extremely common. I have, as I tell people a lot of times in my talks, I've met Jesus in person 3 times. And one time he was a small Taiwanese woman. And that's no joke. So people have religious delusions. It's very common, or religious hallucinations. What I have tended to find is that when the people that I've dealt with, they also were deeply religious people. It wasn't that they just, they didn't believe anything and then all of a sudden they have a religious delusion. I mean, mental health problems usually kind of alter what, the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions you already have. And so they were deeply religious people. And so to just take their religious delusion and just kind of destroy it by saying, well, that's not real and you got to stop thinking that. I think what you can do is, I think it's another opportunity to help them in the context of their faith. I think what you do is you begin to talk through with them that religious delusion in the sense of how is that connected to their faith, what parts of that might be connected to their illness, recognizing that their illness is going to alter their faith in somewhat, and helping them, they one of the things that they ask me all the time is the same thing that was just asked, and that is, how do I know when I'm having a real religious experience, and how do I know when it's not real? Because that's disturbing. I mean, if you think that God is talking to you, but you're not sure if that's real or not, that's probably more disturbing than God talking to you. I mean, God talking to you is maybe disturbing enough for you, but now that you can't decide whether that's real or not, or and what if he's telling you something very wonderful? Like I had a client that was having some psychotic symptoms as a result of a malaria drug that he was taking after a mission trip that he went on, and he was convinced God was sending him to these different parts of the world and he needed to go there. None of this was negative, but it was all brought on by this medication and the side effects of this medication. And so just to destroy that is a negative. So I think what you have to do is, what I do is I say, number one, I say, let's look at the delusion and let's see, is it consistent with your religious tradition? So I grew up in a faith tradition within Christianity. If someone were to say that they were hearing from God, that would be odd. Okay. I've gone to plenty of churches where people say every day that they hear from God, which is very normal for them. So is it consistent with your religious tradition? Is it consistent with the teachings of your religious tradition? So if the person, I've seen religious delusions where a person said, God is telling me to go kill this person. Well, that's not consistent with Christian tradition. That's not consistent with most religious traditions, but certainly not consistent with Christian tradition. So is it consistent with that tradition? And so, and then you look at their culture, the broader culture. And so you kind of help them begin to break it down. So as a provider, I think you have to do the same thing. You don't just be dismissive of it because the person has a psychotic disorder and now they're having this experience. Because, people say to me all the time, well, Abraham heard from people. Why could I not hear from people now? And so I think you have to be very, very careful because you can really damage a person, I think.
Did you want to chime in on that, Dr. Bassi?
Yeah, I just gave that example. So it is interesting that the research shows that religious delusions are much more common if you belong to a religious community. But most of the things that Matt said, but that is where I think it is so important to have a collaborative care with your faith leader. The kid that I described, he was having, in his mind, he was having spiritual experiences and he wasn't open to try any medication because he didn't want to stop having these experiences. And this is a month where you are praying, you are hoping to get this spiritual enlightenment. So I think the way I approached it was, how is it augmenting his functioning or is it impeding it? So the fact that he felt disconnected from the reality, I had to have that conversation with him, that would God really want him to be disconnected to the reality, not for him not to be able to go to classes or have relationships. And does this having spiritual experience, it means for you to be a better human being. And if it's taking you away from it, then is it a possibility that you might be having spiritual experience, but it is too much for your mind and your body to handle, and it's taking you away from reality? So, but that said and done, I realized at that moment that he was more open to me, knowing I come from the same religion. It would be harder for someone from a other religion to have this conversation. But that can be facilitated if you are bringing in faith leaders in this conversation. And because my local faith leader endorsed it and was encouraging of mental health treatment, that we had a successful outcome.
So much wealth of information that y'all are both sharing. This is so great. All right, let me go to some more questions here. Let me see who has the highest vote. Vote, vote, vote. Okay, let me keep going down here. Can you give the best reference you used to provide psychotherapy with religious person?
What does that mean?
Uh,
I'm not sure what that means. They mean a reference, like a.
They said, can you give the best reference you can use to provide psychotherapy with religious, I guess, persons or person?
I don't know what they mean.
No. Okay. Let's.
I mean, there's, as was said earlier, there's this kind of there's an integrated approach where you take psychology and faith and you kind of merge them together. And that's what we both do. That's the kind of approach we take. And then there's an approach where you kind of reinvent the mental health perspective from the context of the theology. And so, she had mentioned that where the theology of the tradition is actually used therapeutically. And the teachings of the tradition, and those both exist in Christianity and in Islam, and so it just depends. I think the important thing to understand is there's what I would say is in Christianity I see because we have a lot of Christian counselors that advertise themselves as Christian counselors. You don't find a lot of people that advertise themselves as a Muslim counselor or a Jewish counselor. You just don't see that as much,
Actually, now we do have.
Well, that's good.
We have a whole directory of mental.
Good. I wish we had more down here
providers.
in Houston. But counselors usually deal with counseling issues. They don't deal with serious mental illness. And I think that's a confusion that a lot of times I've seen in faith communities is they will send people to a counselor of the same faith and not realize that the person needs to go see a psychiatrist, for instance. And so I think that's an important distinction that has to be made in the context of trying to figure out what's appropriate, is getting an assessment and determining really what kind of level of treatment is necessary. So I don't know. I doubt that answered the question, but.
That's okay. Great advice. I have one that has 4 votes from Mark. What advice would you give young or new pastors who are just beginning to address mental wellness in their churches?
Well, I think there's a lot of resources now. I think that this pandemic is really just demonstrated to us the absolute necessity for the church to be able to work in the pastoral care realm much in a much more fluid way than it has been doing. We're going to see a mental health fallout from this that's going to go on for years. What I would say to pastors is, number one, get yourself educated. Number 2, make relationships with mental health care providers in your community. Go out and vet them, so that, here are people that I like to refer to, and then we work collaboratively to help you get better. Because that, they'll refer to you when they have a client that has religious questions that they can't answer, and then you can refer to them. And, then I also think, kind of instructing your congregation that these are common problems that they occur in and out of the faith community, and that they're not any more spiritual or any less spiritual than any other problem, and that there is an opportunity for the faith community to be really involved in helping people get better.
Right. Okay.
Also,
Dr. Awesome.
I would like to add to take care of their own health. Because what we are seeing that COVID-19 has already deepened the mental health crisis in the country. So I see the faith leaders are already very overburdened and spread thin. And especially if you are working in with the congregation, you can get overwhelmed very easily. So as much as you should become aware of other and help others, I think it is very important to take care of yourself as well, and be
Self-care.
cognizant of symptoms of depression and anxiety in yourself as well.
Very true. Self-care, right? We got to do that. All right. Let's see. There's one that has one vote on here. And this one has, what are the best practices for providing resources and referrals with larger churches by smaller mental health ministries, startup lay ministries?
Again, I think that, I just finished a book. It's not out yet, but I just finished writing a book about pastoral care and serious mental illness. And, I interviewed churches all over the country, and, there's a church not too far from here. They only worship 35 on a Sunday, and they have a dynamic mental health ministry that impacts their entire community or their whole county. They work with probation parole. They offer, and then I've also interviewed churches that worship 12,000 on a Sunday morning, and they have very dynamic. So it doesn't really matter how large your faith community is. Really, ultimately, mental health is about a one-on-one relationship with somebody else and an opportunity to help that person get better. So, if you do nothing more than educate your clergy and your staff on how to recognize and then build those relationships, you've already done a tremendous thing. As I mentioned earlier about the idea of hope, if you can build hope in an individual that's struggling with a mental health problem, a hope that God is present with them, the hope that there's a better day to come, the hope that they can get better, you've done a lot for them. And so I think there's a lot of things that a small congregation can do, and there's a lot of things a large congregation can do. And I think first you just have to kind of look around and say, what are the needs of our community? What kind of resources do we have? A lot of these things don't require any money. I mean, you can, the majority of Alcoholics Anonymous groups meet at churches right now across the U.S. I mean, you can get on the AA website and you can request that they set up a group right at your church, and you don't have to do anything except to leave the lights on. And you've already helped your community just by doing that. So it just depends on how, what kind of human capital you have, what kind of resources you have. And so, I would just say, number one, start with the senior pastor or the senior leader and say, we know they're coming here first and we know they're going to want to see this person. So let's get them educated. And then let's just see how far we want to go from there.
Thank you. Okay, we have another one that's, how does PTSD fit into this discussion?
PTSD is a serious mental health problem, and you're about to see a whole lot more of it with this pandemic. I'll tell you that. So,
Absolutely.
when I worked in Libya, that was the primary reason we were there, because the population was, number one, horribly damaged by a dictator, and then they had all been exposed to combat, and they weren't prepared for that. And so PTSD is treatable. Usually requires some type of exposure therapy, where you help the person reprocess the traumatic experience in a safe environment, help them control their physiology. Usually medications involved. It can be very painful to go through that, and a lot of people will drop out because of that. But very treatable. You don't have to be a combat veteran to have PTSD. I mean, one of the highest rates of PTSD is in women that have been victims of sexual assault. So you see a lot of that. So a lot of those go unreported. And so you have a lot of women that are struggling with that long term. I'll let Dr. Abbasi talk about it from a psych perspective.
I think what we are seeing with PTSD and victims of trauma is they feel forsaken by God. Mm-hmm. Or they are at a point of sheer hopelessness. So it is, I think, religion, again, validation from faith leaders, acceptance from the community, and reassuring them their worth, their needs, their importance, because they tend to start believing themselves as a burden. So we really need to kind of create that self-esteem, that self-worth and love in the person. It's interesting. I was looking up the literature on completed suicide, and it talked about how the uh, victims, they are still ambiguous till the last minute. They are still hoping to be rescued. And that's where I think it's such an important role that we can play as faith-based mental health providers. Like I said initially, that hope can be an important strategy that you can give and provide.
Yeah, I would add one thing, and I'd just say that what I see the most from PTSD victims when you do it within a kind of a faith context is they're really struggling with the goodness of God. You know, how if you know if I'm telling them, well, God is with you, God is good, God has a plan for your life, they're going to come back to me and say, well, where the heck was God when this was happening to me? You know, why? If God's all powerful, why didn't He stop this? And trying to explain to a rape victim that God was present, that God is good, that doesn't really go very far. So there's a real struggle there in that context that you don't see, for instance, necessarily when someone has, say, depression or schizophrenia or something. They may say that God is punishing me, but they tend to not say, well, God is not good because I'm sick. But PTSD, that's a whole nother thing because the person went through something very horrible.
I remember reading the book on Auschwitz camp, and I remember the words that the God died for me that night. So definitely there is a lot of healing and support that is needed. But in order to provide that, we have to walk away from the realm of sin and punitive God or heaven or hell. Because when you are a victim of abuse or you have been in a war zone, it's very hard for you to believe that God loves you, that you still are a child of God. So that's where I feel that the faith leaders and the mental health providers coming together can provide a better service.
This is great. Thank you all so much for the wonderful answers. I know that this has been helpful to a lot. Thank you. Let me continue. Let me see if there's some more. Oh. Okay, we have a 3 here. Oh boy, I have no idea how to pronounce this one word. Now, how do you approach anosognosia in a faith community? You can go down to the ask a question if you want to see that.
Anosognosia.
There you go.
Yeah.
In a faith community member, meaning a person who is experiencing a true psychosis, but does not believe there is a mental health problem.
Well, that's like, every day for me. So, anosognosia is there's a subset of people with psychosis that just simply do not know that they're ill. They frankly, they think you're ill for telling them that they're ill. And so, and they can have extreme delusions and hallucinations, and they don't think that there's anything wrong with them. So they don't want to take medication. Why would they take medication? They're not ill. And so, I think that, frankly, you got to deal with it within a faith community the same way you deal with it outside of a faith community. There's really not that much of a difference. With only the exception that if the person's having religious delusions and hallucinations, they may be coming into your faith community and saying, well, God is talking to me, and he's not talking to you, but he's talking to me. He's giving me special information. And when people say, well, you're crazy or whatever, and he says, well, no, I'm not taking anything and I'm perfectly fine. I mean, that could be the struggle. But I think, with a person like that, and that's the great struggle of psychiatry today, is that how do you convince the person to take medication when they because we can't force medication on a person unless they're a danger to themselves or others. And so you've got a person who's delusional, whose relationships are being destroyed, who can't work, who, I mean, and they're suffering, they're struggling, so and you can't help them. So I think, I have to say that, believe it or not, I have found faith to be the great connector. And I have had more than one client who absolutely refused to go see a mental health care provider, but was willing to come talk to me because I would talk to them about their faith and not about their mental health issues. And so they come in and they talk about these delusions they're having. And we were able to build a relationship. And many of those people ultimately agreed to get some treatment. And so I think that you don't necessarily, I think what we do as people that don't have mental health problems, I think what we tend to do is we try to reason with somebody and convince them that they're wrong. And you do the same thing with the person with anosognosia.
Yeah.
You try to convince them, well, you really are ill. And you have to understand their brain isn't working right. So you're not going to be able to do that. So I often say you can't reason with the unreasoned mind, and so stop trying to reason with them. Just have a conversation with them, build a relationship, because it's at a relationship that you can get them to make changes. And then there are lots of things you can do. So, I mean, what I would say is if I'm the religious leader in that community and I have somebody that has anosognosia, hey, have them come in and talk to you about their religious delusions and stuff. And don't be dismissive of them. I mean,
No.
I believe absolutely that God can use religious delusions to strengthen a person's faith. I don't have any problem with that. I certainly don't want that person to suffer and have them become non-functional. But I think God can use any experience to strengthen our faith. So have that conversation, begin to build that relationship, because it's out of a relationship that you're going to be able to get some change.
Dr.
I would
Abbasi,
like
anything?
Yes. So first of all, that's why you go to school for 4 years to learn how to do. But it just brings to me my late mother. She raised 5 physicians, so she really was hell-bent on making us all doctors. That was her passion. But she refused to take medication. So she would take her blood pressure medicine only as needed. And she said, she would tell us all, I don't believe in taking medication. So I think mental illnesses are not separate, right? It is the same way. You could be dealing with somebody who's diabetic or who's hypertensive. I think it all comes, or even let's talk about faith. If you are struggling with faith or somebody who just doesn't want to believe in God, how do you deal with that? And you don't deal with negating them, invalidating. So in therapy, we talk about meet the patient where they are. So you cannot go with preconceived ideas. You have to be open and meet them where they are. And I've learned once you have established good rapport with them and they trust you, then they are more open and believe you that whatever you are saying is for their own wellness. But in order to do that, you have to be sincere, you have to be open, you have to be accepting. You can't take, if they criticize you or say something which is out of your belief system, that doesn't mean you rule them out. So there's another thing we talk about in therapy, that if you want to teach a kid, catch them doing good. So you have to use more positive reinforcement and validation. But given all that, I could never convince my own mother to take her medication.
How interesting, right? Okay, we have one more question. I know the time's running out. So this one had 3 votes. Can you speak to moral injury? This is from Anne.
Yeah, with moral injury, that's more of a more modern term that you hear. You hear moral injury, particularly with combat veterans, things like that. I mean, they've done things or been asked to do things or been exposed to things that kind of violate their morals or what they would consider to be, I have to go in and I have to kill a bunch of people, or I had to be involved in that. And that's, that I would say has tended, in my opinion, to be kind of ignored somewhat by the traditional kind of PTSD kind of treatment approach. We go in and we try to help them kind of process the experience, but we don't necessarily put it in the context of their kind of moral code or faith background. And I think, I've seen guys that have gone through PTSD treatment, and I think it was helpful, but they're still struggling with the moral injury aspect of it. I was involved in, I'm not the person that I thought I was. I'm really a bad person. I thought I was a good person, and so, in some sense, it's the kind of question we've been asking ourselves, like recently, we have these discussions now about slavery, and the outcomes of that and the racial things we're dealing with now. And people say, well, I never owned slaves, or someone will say, well, if I lived at that time, I probably wouldn't have owned slaves. Well, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But see, that's the kind of moral injury kind of question that the combat veterans asking themselves is like, well, I would have always said I wouldn't have done that, and then I did it, and so maybe I'll do it again. Maybe I'm not who I. So I really, I think I have to say, a faith leader working in conjunction with a mental health care provider is so important for this person, if indeed they're a person of faith, which more often than not they are. Because it helps them kind of find a standard. And I think if you look in the scriptures, or you look in the holy books of most faith traditions, you find that people of faith were drawn into situations or asked to do things that were beyond what they believed that they would be able to do or do. You only have to go into the Old Testament to find some pretty bloody, battles and messes. And so it's an opportunity to help them kind of restructure what it is. Plus, I think in that sense, you really get in, again, this is only something that comes from a faith tradition, the idea of forgiveness, which is not really something that I think mental health can really speak to all that well. I mean, the idea of being forgiving yourself, forgiving others, receiving forgiveness from others, but also receiving forgiveness from God. I think that's a faith conversation, and really a mental health care provider needs to make sure that a faith leader is involved in that.
Wonderful.
I think the more we are going towards meditation and alternative healing methods, I think this self-forgiveness is becoming very integral to trauma-informed care.
Wow, thank you so much. Y'all are both wonderful. I know that someone had asked the name of the book that's coming out, Dr. Stanford.
Oh, well, I don't know that yet because sometimes they change the title. So
Okay.
I know what I titled it, but they sometimes change that. I have a book. That came out several years ago that the title is not at all what I had titled it. So
okay.
Just watch for it next year. Hopefully it'll come out next year.
There you go. All right. We'll have to invite you next year. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the wealth of that you have been able to share with everyone that has been able to attend this workshop, and we really appreciate it. And we appreciate everything y'all have done and you continue doing in the communities that you serve. And thank you once again. So before we leave, I want to make sure that whoever is still here and is needing their code for the CEU, the code number is going to be 7676. CEU sign out code is 76. I know we've had a lot of questions about the CEU code, so you have to show up on time and be here to the very end to get these codes. Sign out code is 76. Once again, thank you, both of you, for the wonderful workshop. You'll have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you.